When we lock our front door at night, we assume we've sealed out the world. We feel isolated, secure, and hidden. But that safety is largely a psychological construct. This diagram illustrates what psychologists call the safe space perimeter. Once we cross the threshold of our home, our brains draw a hard boundary at the physical walls. Everything outside is the chaotic unknown. Everything inside is supposed to be controlled and safe. But that perimeter can be tested. A soft tap on a remote cabin window at 4 a.m., the sound of heavy breathing right next to you while you hide under a guest bed. These anomalies directly contradict the brain's internal map of safety. To avoid panic, the brain forces these anomalies into safe, familiar categories. We tell ourselves it's the wind, or the house settling, or a friend playing a prank. The system rejects the threat and explains it away. True horror begins when the logic fails, and you have to face the reality of what is actually standing in the dark. When a threat refuses to stay hidden, the brain's defenses collapse. In the backwoods of North Idaho, a teenager alone at home felt a physical reaction to an unseen observer, a fight or flight response that hit before he even saw the source. Looking out the basement window, he saw a man in filthy clothes with a deranged smile, gently, rhythmically, tapping a hunting knife against the glass. The escalation became undeniable the following morning. Fresh, bare human footprints were stamped into the snow, circling the entire property in a single unbroken trail. The tracks led directly up to the exterior walls and stopped at every single window. The intruder had been calculating, moving from pane to pane, searching for a way to look inside. The physical walls of the house held, but the feeling of sanctuary vanished. The victim was now acutely aware of being watched from the outside, effectively trapped within a transparent cage. The ultimate violation occurs when that perimeter is successfully bypassed. During a game of hide-and-seek, a teenager slid under a guest bed. A few minutes later, heavy footsteps entered the dark room. They stopped right next to the bed. He held his breath, listening to the slow, heavy breathing of the person standing directly above him. When the footsteps eventually left, the teenager went downstairs to end the game, but his friend had been in the basement the whole time. The breathing in the guest room belonged to an unknown intruder. While that intruder stayed in the shadows, a group of friends renting a cabin in South Carolina discovered that a predator can just as easily stand in plain sight. At 3:30 a.m., a student walked into the kitchen and found a man standing in the dark. He was naked, his back covered in long, raw scratches, and he was silently swaying on his feet in front of the refrigerator. Every door and window in the cabin had been locked. There was no sign of forced entry. The stranger had somehow gained access to the inner sanctum without a sound. There is a heavy, specific realization that comes with sharing your home with a predator. You realize that while you were convinced you were alone, you were actually sitting in the same room as someone who does not belong there. The immediate aftermath is chaotic. The teenagers in the first story sprinted to a neighbor's house. The college students fled their cabin into the night, leaving their belongings behind in a frantic escape. But the police investigations often lead nowhere. Authorities arrive to find empty rooms and locked doors. With no suspects and no evidence of a struggle, the victims are left without any form of closure. These victims survived, but the invisible boundary between the dangerous outside world and their private sanctuary has vanished. Everyday life is now colored by dread. The brain processes the sound of a house settling as a potential footstep, and a slightly open closet door becomes a source of immediate, lethal suspicion. It leaves you with a question that is nearly impossible to answer. Throughout your life, how many times has a stranger stood perfectly still in the dark with you, while you were entirely convinced you were alone?